of a sudden,
Integrating.
I can't remember to do all of the things. Okay, we're recording. And we've got that, our screen sharing. Okay, I think we're set. Let's see, okay, so let's see, I've got a couple of announcements. Let's see, Thomas isn't here yet, and that's largely aimed at him, so. I would like to go ahead and schedule the field trip to, the Natural History Museum of Utah for a week from Saturday. That would be the 24th. So I'll need to reserve it. There's still a chance we might get in to see the paleo collection, get in there in the collection and look at it. But that depends on an intern being willing to do it. The life sciences cure, or the earth sciences curator, she's great, but she's not gonna be there. And I'm assuming that Eric Reichert, the mammal curator, will be able to take us around. So it'll still be worth it. It just won't be quite as good as it would be.
You'll get to peek in to see the dinosaur.
I mean, you'll be able to look into where the collections are, but you won't go in there and get to touch things and stuff. Okay, so I need to get a van or some kind of vehicle scheduled for that. And the one that I get depends on how many people go. And there's a huge difference in the cost. If everybody wants to go, it's gonna cost 2 or 3 times as much. That's okay. But what I don't wanna do is schedule a vehicle for over $100 a day with poor gas mileage and then have 3 people show up. Okay, so how many people are seriously planning to go on a week from Saturday? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I will, if I can get a minivan, I think I can take 5 or 6 people.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and try to do that. This is a fun trip. How many people have been to that museum? Have any of you been there?
I haven't been, but I've seen some of it.
Okay, it's a nice museum. Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
I might be visiting with my family down there. Thought I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's it. Is there anyone else that wants to meet us down there? Cause that would work fine. Is that what you're talking about?
That's the plan. That's what the plan is right now, but I'm gonna ask them tonight to see if that's gonna go.
Okay, well, we'll have space for you. Otherwise. Okay, so, one other thing, or 2 other things, is that, the amphibian evolution notes are posted in that week where we were studying salamanders. Okay, so, and I think we'll put, after these 2 lectures, we'll put together some kind of a lecture test on evolution. And then, I also put on a couple videos there, just optionally if you want to see them about evolution and the Earth's history and stuff. Okay.
All right. Good to go?
Take it away.
Well, hello, everybody, again. So today, I think that today and Friday are pretty funny compared to the content for amphibian evolution, because there's so much to talk about in fossil reptile evolution. So I'm gonna do my best to try to focus in on the extant groups and kind of their origins and some interesting fossil groups that are related to them. But I'm not gonna be able to resist basically doing drive-bys of all these extinct clades that have really nothing to do with today's diversity that I think are cool and are absolutely part of the reptile story. There's 2 pieces of paleo art. The big groups, I'm gonna say, of reptiles are all featured here. This is northern South America about 50 million years ago. This is Australia not that long ago, tens of thousands of years ago.
It could be like today almost.
If you have a giant flightless duck and a really huge monitor lizard, you can recreate Australia from few tens of thousands of years ago. Original, like Aboriginal people, when they got to Australia, these animals were both there, which is really fun. If you come to Idaho, there's mammoths and cats, but if you go to Australia, there's those things.
One of my memories from spending time in the Northern Territory of Australia was, we were in a bar on the Adelaide River. And one of those walked into the bar.
Oh, a monitor?
Yeah, it was a big
iguana?
monitor. I mean, it was a really big monitor.
Yeah.
And it was just like a pet dog. It was
didn't-
going
yep.
around and looking
Yep.
at people and
Yep.
it wanted, it wanted, I think it wanted to be given something to eat.
That's right.
I think it was big.
I have some family in-laws in Australia and we were there one time and people were just picnicking. And one of them walked out and was just going underneath everyone's chairs. And
Yeah.
this one woman didn't know it was there. And then there's like a 5-foot lizard underneath her and she really screamed.
I was impressed at how big it was.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Well, we'll get to this one. This is Megalania. This is the largest monitor lizard. It's an extinct taxon, but it's pretty awesome, pretty big animal. So, okay, just like we started with amphibian evolution. Here's some nice pictures of some of today's living reptiles with some humans. So same as I asked you guys with amphibians, what are the kind of things you want to learn in the next 2 hours, meaning today and Friday, about reptile evolution? So go ahead and chat with each other. Here's this is an Indian one. This is a water monitor, which you can find in Southeast Asia too, but anyway. Go ahead and chat with each other. Cass's known hatred for like.
Yes, you remember.
I know, I remember it well.
Imagine my hatred exceeding that when I learned about humans, sirens, aliens, and snakes in this class.
Boy, you're in the wrong class, right? I think I know that guy.
Do you?
I thought he was a crocodile hunter at first, khaki everything, but.
I thought you were talking about the crocodile.
No,
I know that guy.
I think that's, Lucha.
Oh, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, he's an endocrinologist. Oh, he died. He's
Black
an
crocodile?
No. But he was a, endocrinologist or herpetologist. He was one of the guys, he's the guy that broke open that whole thing.
Sure.
And, I met him they had a World Wildlife Fund had a meeting.
Florida would be a
A news spread back in Milwaukee. For the next 3 days, we were talking about environmentalists. He was talking about the crocodile turtle that they did down there. That was a fascinating meeting.
I feel like you get that everywhere. That time of year. I feel like you get a lot.
Really interesting.
All right, let's hear from you guys. What kind of things are we hoping to touch on? Help me hone this. Yes.
Venom.
Whoa,
That's good.
tell me more about venom. What do you mean?
How do reptiles make venom? What, monitor lizards, like, do they use venom or is it bacteria? I feel like that's a concept that's been debated forever and there's no
Do you talk about that?
conclusion.
I will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll cover that when we talk about snakes. And, but yes, the monitors have them,
Okay.
not just dirty mouths.
Other spicy swammates that mess with you when they bite you. Yeah.
Where is the division between reptile and bird?
Is there a line we can all agree on that sets birds apart? I'm gonna say like, sure, if you want. The same could be said for turtles, the same can be said for crocodiles. They all have the exact same kind of like definitional like separateness. This one obviously is in a sort of visceral way, very different from the others, but we can talk about it. Yeah,
Are there extinct animals that have a shell like turtles?
ooh,
Yeah.
Other shells, that's fun. Yeah,
When did snakes lose their pectoral and pelvic girdles? Were they like the same time or separately?
Some
is
haven't
this
told
really
you.
Cass's question that you're asking?
No, this is
Because-
my question.
Because
It's not mine.
too much of the brand, like, can't ask himself. That's.
It wasn't mine. This is slander.
Okay, anything else? All right, cool. Well, let's get into it. You guys probably already know most of this kind of stuff, but here's just a little prep.
Out of one.
Oh, what is it?
Defense mechanisms, like the rattle, how does that happen?
Defense mechanisms, and you mean like the rattle. I will tell you guys that some of this specific stuff, like, venom and the rattle, I'm not touching at all.
I'll cover
Chuck,
that.
Chuck will probably get there.
Alright.
That's
Uh,
modern, or
Yeah, I mean, there's fossils of those things, but I just know I won't get there in 2 hours. If I had all semester, we would get there. Okay, so just to refresh you, I know you know this because this is herpetology. Here's your extant reptile diversity with like the species. There's one little rhynchocephalian alive today, a few crocs, a good amount of turtles, an absolute mountain of snakes and lizards, over 10,000 species.
Nice picture.
Yeah, well, you gotta have a snake and a lizard. These are both squamates. The bigger group is squamates. Snakes are set deeply within the phylogeny of the animals you guys would call lizards. So it's not very accurate to say like snakes and lizards, I think, because an iguana is related to a garter snake more than either one is to a skink.
Just like.
Right, snakes are lizards, birds are dinosaurs, it's the exact same thing. And just like that, birds are reptiles, they're absolutely a part of this. And so I put it there on purpose. Crocodiles and birds share a more recent common ancestor than either one does with these groups. And then turtles are the sister to crocs and birds. So there's like this internal structure to reptile evolution that's like super well grounded at this point. And so it is weird that a snake is a kind of lizard, and it might be weird that a bird is kind of dinosaur and a dinosaur is a kind of reptile, but like that is how it goes. So let's talk about it. Just to catch you guys up again with our geology. So I'm coming to you guys with like a fossil perspective. Where we were in amphibian evolution, we talked about things like vertebrates transitioning onto land, going from a fishy lifestyle to an amphibious lifestyle where reproduction is probably tied to the water. We know when that's happening. It's in the late part of that period called the Devonian. We spent a lot of time in amphibian evolution talking about the Carboniferous, when the big groups of tetrapods diversified, the first amphibians, and then even the reptile mammal split happens back in the Carboniferous. And then we talked about some amphibian evolution in the Permian, which is the time of Pangea. We have a lot of terrestrialization of the tetrapods. The amniotes, which we're going to talk about today, that lay eggs on land, really diversify in the Permian, and we'll be off after that. And so here's that time-calibrated phylogeny. This is from your guys' herpetology textbook. If you look in your textbook, of all the lobe-finned fishes. And so you can see there's lots of fossil groups. We talked about an amphibian evolution right here. And so today we're going to start talking about all these groups up here, the amniotes, mostly reptiles, but mammals are also amniotes. So again, here's what we saw. You guys have seen this already, but here's like basically what we talked about in amphibian evolution. Fossil-wise, there's the lobe-finned fishes, there's the tetrapods, there's the amniotes. You can see the frogs and salamanders are over there. Now we're going to go up into amniota today, reptiles and mammals. And so when we look at amniotes, we know when they diversified. We talked about some of these groups during the amphibian evolution lectures, animals that are living amphibious lives, but much more closely related to amniotes than they are to today's living amphibians. And a feature that we can say unites the modern groups of amniotes, and maybe some of these have it, but we don't know because it doesn't preserve very well, is this really, really diagnostic feature, which is the amniotic egg. So all these animals are laying eggs of one kind or another, but the amniotic egg is a really special adaptation. You probably have heard of it before. When animals are laying eggs on land, you guys might think of the shell, like a leathery shell or a hard shell. That's a thing that's really important to the adapting to lay your eggs out of the water. That's not what the amniotic egg technically is. The amniotic egg, oopsie, is referring to this structure here. I thought I had a bubble on it, called the amnion. It's a little sac, little water-filled sac that's around the little developing embryo. So here's the yolk for nutrients to come in. Here's this structure here where waste goes out as the baby is growing up, but it's all contained within this little tiny amnion, this amniotic sac filled with amniotic fluid. You can almost think of it as like taking the pond and like having your own little private pond inside your egg is a really good way to think about it. And so the shell's part of the story, but it's not what we mean when we say amniotic egg. We're talking about that little sac. Another thing that's really interesting for you guys to probably think about is how reproductive ecologies must have changed. Life histories must have changed as animals terrestrialize. a lot of frogs and certainly a lot of like ray-finned fishes, when they reproduce, they spawn, they send their gametes out into the water, eggs and sperm go into the water, they make an embryo. That embryo floats in the water, maybe the female lays it in a certain place, maybe there's nest guarding by some of the males, but oftentimes some of that gamete mixing is sort of random, especially in the animals that broadcast spawn. Once you come up on the land though, there has to be internal fertilization. The embryo has to be created inside the body of the female because she then puts a shell on it. You don't get to lay an egg with a shell and then have it get fertilized. That's not how it works. And so with internal fertilization, there's a bunch of quite clearly male reptiles over there. You want to take in some biodiversity. But what you guys could think about evolutionarily is suddenly like mate choice and things like sexual selection, not that that's not happening in the water, but on land, that's really becomes a factor for a lot of the phenotypes of these animals. Suddenly females and males can really choose each other to mate because the process is a little bit different. So just something interesting to think about. When you guys think of amniotic eggs, you might think of these things like crocodiles hatching out of eggs. There's a crocodile inside of its egg. Here's some frog spawn, you know, without a shell laid in a pond. But the other thing that's fun is like mammals lay eggs too. And you guys probably know that. Platypuses and echidnas are today living mammals that I could show you a picture just like this with a bunch of little mammals cracking up out of their egg. We don't think about mammals laying eggs very much because we do not, and neither do marsupials, but there are still mammals that do this. So this is like a very ancient feature for the whole of amniota, not just for reptiles to lay eggs like that. Okay, so here's our living groups of amniotes, mammals on one side, which we totally won't talk very much about at all today, and then here's reptiles on the other. Those are those groups you just saw biodiversity-wise and how they are related to one another. So crocodiles go with birds, turtles go with them, snakes and lizards are a big old group, and then the tuatara all by itself is with snakes and lizards. Okie dokie. We call that side of amniota reptilia. If you find a fossil organism and it's an amniote and it's over here somewhere, it's a kind of reptile. There's your like definitional thing for reptile. And the other side for mammals, we call that side synapsida. So you don't have to worry about that too much. So obviously Bengals and you are mammals. One thing that's really clear to us, and when we study amniote evolution, is some really interesting innovations in the skull. And so a lot of the amphibians you guys have met, a lot of the non-amniote tetrapods we've met, when you see their skull, they've got a big hole in the side, that's their eyeball, the orbit. And then back here, there's all these all these bones that are all connected to each other. The skull's kind of solid. When we get up into amniotes, there's different kinds of fenestration or holes that evolve. And those have to do with how jaw muscles are inserted. So synapsids have one single hole. You have that same hole right now. If you touch your jaw and close your mouth and you move your hand up your muscle, you'll feel a bar of bone. Your hole is oriented sideways, but you still have that synapsid hole. And actually that synapsid mammal hole is probably the ancestral condition for all amniotes. But reptiles are very famous. You probably heard this word before if you ever look into reptile evolution, this word diapsid, which means two holes, an upper and a lower temporal fenestra. When you look at the fossils of animals that we find right here, it's really complicated, but all the living reptiles come from diapsid ancestors. Animals like turtles today absolutely do not have this condition present in their skulls, and a lot of the squamates don't, a lot of the birds don't. But we can trace the evolution of those muscle insertions through time. And this is the ancestral condition for today's reptiles that's been modified in a bunch of the groups. Crocs, they still have it just fine. Okay. So when we look at, you can ignore that, sorry. When we look at this phylogeny, one thing that's kind of fun to think about is like, we just asked, you know, where's the line for birds? We can ask that for all the groups. Where's the line for mammals? Depending on who you ask in herpetology, you have some people who would go a little bit up the mammal side of things because they're still talking about animals that are pretty reptilian. This animal is one of our cousins, but its life history and how it moved and how it thermoregulated and all these other things, pretty reptile-like. And so there's a transition here as you get up to mammals, just like there's transitions for all of these reptile groups. So I want you to think about mammals, I want you to think about crocodiles, I want you to think about snakes as each pretty highly derived organisms. And that like kind of reptile idea, that sort of what you mean when you say reptiles, when you don't mean birds and you don't mean mammals, floats probably like that, which is really interesting. But anyway, we're not gonna talk about any of the mammal stuff today, sorry. We're only going onto the reptile side of things. So here's that phylogeny again, the living groups. What I want to do today, give you guys a little bit of scaffolding for like this tree. So the common ancestor of all of today's reptiles, if you find a fossil here, it's reptilia. The common ancestor of all of today's reptiles goes in this clade called Sauria. Okay, monophyletic group, all of its descendants, every one of these 6 things are saurians. One side of Sauria is Lepidosauromorpha, the lizard-like ones. The other side is Archosauromorpha. So there's tons of fossils that we can say are Archosauromorphs, tons of fossils that we can say are Lepidosauromorphs within this crown group, reptiles. The common ancestor of crocs and birds is a very, very well-defined node. That node is Archosauria. So I hope you can see Archosauria, and then anything closer to Archosaurus is an Archosauromorph. That's how that works. Same thing's true on the other side. Sphenodon, all by itself, plus all those tons of snakes and lizards, is in a clade called Lepidosauria. Anything closer to them is a Lepidosauromorph. And so this is how we're going to be able to talk. I'm going to use words like this pretty casually as I'm talking about different fossil groups. And so we have fossil lepidosaurs and fossil archosaurs, and this is just to help you guys get oriented. Squamates, snakes and lizards, are that node right there, just so to be clear. And so I'm showing you guys all this and giving you all this like kind of phylogenetic taxonomy, not because I really want you to remember it, but because I'm going to use it quickly to talk about all these fun things that fill in all over here. So a lot of these are animals you guys probably know about. There's some really interesting and Earth history-wise really important organisms that are reptiles, and this is how they're spread. You can see there's plenty of reptile groups that are outside today's crown diversity, and then some pretty famous ones that go in different places within the reptile family tree, which is pretty cool. All right, giving you more of that geological background here, we're going to start in the Permian and talk about cool reptiles. So you saw this slide in amphibian evolution, so you don't really have to read it or anything. These are the slides I used for my Vert Paleo class. But there it is, if you want it. This is the time of amniotes. This is the time of Pangea, a world that's getting increasingly warm and increasingly arid. And so it might kind of, in that very oversimplified way, make sense to you that amniotes are really diversifying well in the Permian. So let's talk about some Permian reptiles. I'm going to talk about some of the groups that are down here today. And so the first group I want to tell you guys about are these little guys called Varanopids. Varanopids are really a nightmare right now. And I think this is like a very good lesson in how science is really complicated. They have one single opening in the side of their skull, a fenestra for the jaw muscles. They do not have 2. And depending on who you ask right now, what are these animals? Are they early mammal relatives, or are they the earliest reptile relatives? It's a really controversial placement. This is an absolutely gorgeous fossil. I bet if you guys looked at this, you'd say, well, that's a lizard. But it's not. It might actually be a mammal line relative. I think it might be actually probably on the reptile side of things based on some work that my grad students and I are doing. But these are like a good idea of what these animals look like, very lizard-like early things on the reptile side. These 2 animals are almost certainly on the reptile side of things, so it's possible this clade will end up breaking in half. I wanted to show you guys this though, because this is like a very cool thing. This is an animal called Heliosaurus. This is an aggregation. There's a skeleton right here with little pieces of armor on its back, and then tucked up against it are 4 or 5 little versions of itself. And so this is interpreted not only as a social aggregation, but maybe even like a parent with offspring, which is really exciting. Because one of the earliest reptiles in the fossil record at all is like exhibiting maybe parental care. That is absolutely not the kind of thing people think of when they think of reptiles. And this is not some derived condition. This is almost at the very start of reptiles. And there's multiple species in this group. This one's called Dendromia, the tree mother. It's an organism that was found inside of a fossil tree stump, like living in the log. And there's a little one like right next to it. And so is that also possibly an example of parental care? Really interesting to think about way back in time, over 300 million years ago, some of the earliest reptiles being able to do that kind of thing. The reason I'm telling you guys about these animals also is because like they're a research objective of mine. And so here's this specimen right here is from South Africa. Here is that exact specimen. I took this picture. I was in France last year. We took this fossil to the synchrotron, like a big particle accelerator, and shot super powerful X-rays at it so that we can process the details of the brain case and the ears of the juveniles and the adults and learn a lot of things about this. This is why I'm pretty confident we have an answer to what these animals are. And so I just thought you guys would appreciate knowing that this is like actual research that's going on here on this campus. And so down at the museum, and that's my grad student Xavier, we are like actively working on amniote origins, and these animals are like really important to that. Another group of early reptiles that I think are really fun are the para-reptiles. This is a very, very ecologically diverse clade. I think the thing I want you guys to take away is how much is going on within this clade, and again, really early in reptile evolution. So within this clade, there's the first amniote that returns to the oceans, a secondarily marine amniote. You get large-bodied herbivores, you get some burrowers, you get animals that are facultatively able to be bipedal, all in this clade, all really early. This is all pre-dinosaur times. Reptiles doing interesting things. So there's the mesosaur. I'll put these all up for a second. I'll let you guys take a second because I'm blabbing. Talk to each other, make some observations about these fun parareptiles. These are the most diverse reptiles in this Permian period, are these things in this clade. So go ahead and chat with each other about these guys.
Clarities, beauty venomous, common lizard.
Dinosaurs. It's got really good claws too. I think that.
Yeah, maybe I'm confusing it with Moses.
I was gonna say, what if it's?
They both are. Mesosaurs and mosasaurs, totally different, they both go in the water.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Well, I wonder if maybe the guy aquatic, maybe the purple came from that, I don't know.
Stegos, kind of.
I mean, those three are still pretty big at that.
Yeah, it does not look like, does not look like any reptile for them though.
Big.
Any comments on these things? Questions about these things?
There are
Yeah,
a lot of different like paths this family took.
Yeah.
Uni-Venus looks like it's a basilisk or a collared lizard,
Mm.
and then Polycophon and Bunastegus, like mammal-like.
Oh, mammal-like, yeah, what, like stubby tails or something?
Tail, big, wrinkly.
Wrinkly. So Bunastegus,
Bunastegus,
this is an animal, this one here, this is a skull of an animal related to Bunastegus, like there's the teeth, nostrils, eyeballs. These are some of the biggest early amniote herbivores, some of the animals that for the first time fill like the terrestrial herbivore niche where they're eating up plants. They got a big fat gut for fermenting that plant material, almost certainly. These are their teeth. Their teeth are very leaf shaped for stripping plants, probably things like ferns and horsetails to get after their food. And so reptiles are some of the first animals to explore that large bodied herbivory niche space, which is really cool. There are other animals very similar to this on the mammal side, which we're not going to talk about, that are also sort of these rotund barrel animals lumbering around in the Permian. But both reptile and mammal line animals explore that large bodied herbivory space in the Permian. The other thing that's always important for me to like remind you guys of is to think about time. This clade is existing for like, look, we're going off the string here, right? Like this is like gonna be, we're over 80 million years of time right now. So like all of the mammal evolution you guys think about for the most part happened in the last like 50 or 60 million years. And I'm showing you 80 million years of time. So it's like, there's no wonder that you can get a lot of very different types of organisms, right? So Mesosaurus is one of those first marine reptiles. It gets kind of paddly legs, or hands and feet. I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say. And then its ribs are really interesting. Its ribs get really heavy. We call them pachyostotic, and it's probably a buoyancy thing to like keep them underwater because they're still air breathing. Any marine reptile, any marine mammal has to come up to the surface to breathe. They don't have gills, right? That's really interesting. This is a picture that from an expedition I was on to Antarctica. And so this is us finding one of these little guys, these little colophonids. So this is one of my colleagues, and there's a skull right here, and here's the backbone with the ribs, and then here's the arms with little hands on them. So this is like, sometimes you find like, you know, pretty chunky fossils, and this is an example of like an absolutely stunner of a little parareptile we found in Antarctica, which is really cool. So you guys might remember that between the Permian and the Triassic is the worst mass extinction ever. We talked about it when we were in amphibian evolution. And so parareptiles like take a huge hit there. Some of them do survive though. And so some of these animals like Procolophon, this group of parareptiles, this one right here, survive up into that Triassic period. And when you find the first dinosaurs and some of the first mammals, there's like little Procolophons running around with them. So this is a clade that does very well for quite a long time. Extinct now, no living descendants, but really interesting. Within parareptiles, there's this little tiny lizard-like family called Milleretidae. That's a fossil in collections in South Africa that I found, I found it in collections, I didn't find the specimen. But I realized like it didn't have any description, it was like undescribed, it's like a new species of these little animals. And so that same grad student I just showed you, Xavier, he has actually spent most of his PhD working on these animals here at ISU. And so we have done, again, some of that synchrotron scanning on these little skeletons. And so we're able to look inside the rock and digitally pull out the bones and get these sort of like amazing renders and seeing into their brain cases and their ears to understand these animals' evolution. It turns out these animals are very, very interesting, and they're really telling us a lot about the common ancestor of today's reptiles. And again, they're in social aggregations. You might see there's 3 skulls in this one block, and we didn't know that till we scanned it. There's the skull you can see, and then there's 2 more that are a little bit smaller underneath it. So again, like some evidence of sociality, and this is all research happening here, which is why I'm telling you about it. It's also multiple species. This one up there, that's the specimen up on the right, and then the rainbow colored is the skull as we've like taken it out digitally. And this one's probably more of a burrowing animal. It's got a pretty reinforced skull, which is really cool. Anyway, ISU research. Okay, here's too much. Don't bother reading. It's a nightmare. But what this is showing you the Permian right here. Time is going up on the left-hand side. Carboniferous, Permian, Triassic. And this is a figure showing a hugely good number, not all by any means, but a hugely good number of the actual reptile fossils that we have from this early burst of reptile evolution. And so these black blobs represent like the duration in time of like the taxon that's listed right here. So like that animal's known from this time. And then you can see there's a phylogeny. These are supposed to be connected, but I just cropped this together from 2 parts of the figure because it was too big. So this is a big phylogeny of reptile evolution. It's a big summary. You guys definitely don't have to read anything on there. Here's that Permo-Triassic mass extinction event. Here's the common ancestor of all of today's reptiles. Here's where snakes and lizards go. Here's where birds go. There's where crocodiles go. I want you guys to take a minute, talk to each other. Reptiles originate, what's that?
Where are turtles?
Turtles are not on this phylogeny because they're tricky. And this is a little bit old. This is from 2016. And so those people were like, nope, they're not touching turtles. I think I would say I know where turtles go, but this is an analysis that intentionally excluded turtles. But what I want you guys to look at here is we know reptiles and mammals split in the Carboniferous. I just showed you some parareptiles and some other kinds of reptiles that we know lived in the Permian. This animal is thought to be related very much to the living group, not animals like the parareptiles you just met. And so all I'm going to ask you to do is look at this empirical data. This is like the raw fossil record. Talk about the distribution of black blobs below and above the red line. Don't even overthink it.
For the most part.
Is that just because there was a lot more niches, maybe?
Yeah.
Bill,
Almost like they're
All right, what's the very simple observation?
there's a lot more blobs above the line than.
Yes, this Triassic period is the first part of the Mesozoic era, which is called the age of reptiles. It's been a long-standing problem that we've known reptiles and mammals split in the Carboniferous, but for reptiles' early fossil record, not much to talk about. That's why my lab's doing research on them. There's a couple of animals that are maybe reptiles in the crown group from the Permian. 1 or 2 of those I actually think aren't even reptiles. So the big question I've been asking for years is, this is 50 million years of time. We have to be having reptiles here. We have some that are old enough, but where are they? There's no black blobs here. That's such a problem. Where are they? And so I heard some people talking, oh, maybe it's niche space, maybe these radiated and all that. I believe you, but that doesn't help me with, I'm in rocks that are this old, I'm in rocks that are this old. Where are they? And what's really cool is in the last like 5 or 6 years, we've kind of come to a pretty convincing answer on that. That'll help us like drive that question. It is inherently itself a hypothesis, but we can then go out into the world and test that. So let me show you some stuff. So this is a paper I was on a few years ago, looking at all of these Permian, this is the late Permian, so rocks that are like this old right here. Permian tetrapod communities, any amphibian, any mammal relative, any reptile relative. Looking at their communities distributed across Pangea. All of the really excellent places to get fossils from the late Permian are in Southern Africa, places right here, or up in China. Okay, so what's interesting is this is a diagram that's comparing the similarity of these different faunas relative to one another, like what the proportion that is in this group, the proportion that's in that group that you find at any one locality. And I think what's really interesting is you guys can see in the southern high latitudes and the northern high latitudes, the analysis finds that those habitats are like similar and the ecosystems are like dominated by the same kinds of animals. Whereas the tropical areas are very different in terms of the composition from those places. You guys don't know this, but I'm telling you, the really excellent places to find fossils are here. There's not very much we know about from the purple blob and the blue blob. And so that's very interesting. Here's the same data, but mapped in a different way. So what you guys are seeing here is latitude, so 0 degrees north, right on the equator. That's some outcrops you can go to in Morocco today. Morocco was on the equator then. Here's 20 degrees south, down to 60 degrees south. Here's 20 degrees north, up to 40 degrees north. Jumgar is China, Southern Urals is Russia, other places you can read the name of. And this is the distribution of these different groups of animals. The light yellow is early reptiles that are related to the crown group. The blue is actual crown group reptiles, archosaur relatives. So go ahead and talk to your neighbors. Where's this light yellow and where's this light blue on this distribution?
Yeah.
So how would you describe the distribution of the bright yellow and the light blue, like on the surface of the earth? Like where are we finding these animals when we do find them?
These also seem to be located more in the Mediterranean area.
Well, yeah, right. So these low latitudes, like Southern Alps, Morocco, Niger, so that's in North Africa. And so when we put all this together and really looked at this in a summary, and I had never seen a diagram like this before, it became really obvious. South Africa and places like the South Urals in Russia have always been, for a century, the place you go to look for fossils from the late Permian, because there's thousands and thousands of specimens to find. But those specimens are very much things related to mammals. That's what all this green stuff is. If you want to study reptiles, it looks like when we do find fossils, and they're rare in these places, but they're found, there is reptile diversity at the equator. And so it's just a really, really, really probably sampling issue for us. We need to do more field work in North Africa, the Middle East, and Southern Europe. That's where we'll find them. When I get a grant and I go to Zambia, which I've done a bunch of times, I'm always looking for reptiles, and maybe I should stop. Because we all have, South Africa, this is a sampling, this bar here is like literally tens of thousands of fossils. And we still don't have any reptiles. Maybe we've looked enough there. And so it's a sampling thing. And so what's really cool is like, this is our idea of what the late Permian is looking like at the equator. This is a really poorly sampled ecosystem, but all of these animals are known from either bones or trackways. These are the most exciting ones, probably related to like the crocs and birds of today, archosauromorphs. We don't have any bones for these two animals. This art is lovely, but it's like almost completely like made up. What we do have for these animals, absolutely, is trackways. We've got tons of footprints and handprints with scales on them that have the architecture of archosaur feet. We have no bones. So how frustrating is that? There's probably animals like this, and someday someone's gonna find their skeletons and we're gonna be excited. But anyway, look at the equator if you wanna find early reptiles. I think that's really cool. And if you guys think about how mammals and reptiles work today, there's something sort of like inherently like, it pulls on your brain a little bit, that the reptile diversity is equatorial and the like mammal relative diversity is higher latitude, where it's like a little bit more seasonal. It's very interesting. All right. So the end Permian extinction happens. You guys have heard about this in amphibian evolution, bunch of volcanoes, do a bunch of bad stuff. I'm not going to focus on it today. Let's get into the Triassic as best that we can. So the Triassic is when the age of reptiles, the Mesozoic, like really starts. Here's that summary slide for the Triassic that you've seen before. In terms of reptile evolution, it's the same as with amphibian evolution. In the Triassic, the first of so many clades shows up. The first mammals are in the Triassic, the first frogs and salamanders, certainly, the first turtles, the first crocodiles, the first lepidopsaurs, certainly the first things that are related to the Tuatara, they all show up in the Triassic. So the Triassic is the time of pretty explosive reptile diversification, which is really cool. So there's that. Oh, I'm looking at the clock and I'm gonna skip this right now. So let's go to just talk about the Triassic side of things. So we've met a couple Permian reptiles. I introduced you guys to these Varanopids, this big group, this big clade called parareptiles. Now let's talk about some of the other clades that show up here in the Triassic. And a lot of this diversity, like I said, these diversifications are Triassic events, almost all of them. And so when we look at this, you can see that this explosion happens in the Triassic and there's almost nothing in the Permian. And that's been known for a long time. This is one of my favorite Onion articles that came out when I was in college. I'll let you read this. This is like a letter to the editor from a person who needs schools and libraries to stop teaching Triassic. They're okay with all the rest of the fossil record, but the Triassic is too weird and too crazy, so it needs to be pulled from our schools. Anyway, I think that's funny. There's a lot of ridiculous reptiles in the Triassic, and I hope you enjoy. Okay. So let's talk about some of the things that do happen in the Triassic that are really weird and really interesting. And so we can probably talk about a couple of the marine reptile groups today. And so, do you guys know what this thing is?
Is that ichthyosaur?
An ichthyosaur. So it looks like a dolphin or a shark. It has an ancestor that's like a little lizard. This is a marine reptile. Just like we have dolphins today and their ancestors look like little possums. There's reptile versions of that, secondarily marine reptiles. So ichthyosaurs get really famous in dinosaur time. Some of them get huge, but in the Triassic is when they originate. So I want to show you some of their fossils and some of their cousins. Again, the Triassic is like just ridiculous. Go ahead and talk to each other about some of these animals.
It's got like a pouch.
Yeah.
That one looks freaking long. It's got like all these things.
Got a sea snake, got
I
a
know.
whale.
Yeah. Like,
But there are some things that, if we look at it from a convergent evolution, a lot of these animals would borrow a lot of these traits. Those other reptiles.
Yeah.
The baleen whales with their.
Yeah, like-
Brandon?
Yeah.
Looks like your graduate student that was working on.
But also the friendly mind creatures. of both
Where is she now?
species. She's their PhD at University of Water.
Oh, she went to University. Oh, good.
That's what she's up to.
That's so.
Pupaesuchus. Everybody likes, Pupaesuchus is a real nightmare. On the top of its back, even though it's got this really, really delicate face and these weird hands. I hope you guys see how differently they're all doing things with their hands to make a sort of flipper or a paddle. So when they do things very differently, that's a good sign that they're not related. They're different groups of reptiles all going into the water at the same time. Almost immediately after the extinction, these groups are like into the water. Pupaesuchus is ridiculous because it has this teeny little face, but there's a very thin row of like armor just on the top of its back. Why? We don't know. So all I wanted to do was show you guys these to make you just deal with the fact that they exist. I'm gonna do this a lot. So ichthyosaurs though are part of that group. So none of the animals I just showed you are ichthyosaurs, but ichthyosaurs are related to them, we think. Here's early ichthyosaurs. Some of the, as you might expect, transitional forms that are going into the water look a lot like seals or otters. They are transitional. Little Cardarhynchus here absolutely can flop around on land. It's got little flippers. It's got a little short little face. Chaosaurus, Symbospondylus. These things go into the water and really quickly. This is like one of the first like really dominant groups of marine reptiles. That dolphin morphology that they get, that doesn't come until like 50 million years into their evolution. And so the beginning of them looks a lot like this. Some of the ones that get big in the Triassic are really interesting. You get big ones like Thalata archon that are like basically orcas. They're 35 feet long and they got giant mouths full of teeth. Very interesting predators. But some of the biggest are these animals like Shonisaurus, which exists in this part of the Triassic. So still in the Triassic period. Some of these are big. They're like almost 60 feet long, some of them. And one of them doesn't have any teeth at all. So is this living like a whale ecology? We don't know, really. That's one of my other grad students, Gary. His master's work was in Nevada. He has one of these that he found in the ground, like right here, only a meter or two away from the mass extinction at the end of the Triassic. And so he's publishing that right now as like showing that these like healthy ocean ecosystems right up until that extinction, instead of like some sort of degrading ecosystem, which is really cool. These are really wild animals. This is like I have to remind you, this is a reptile that I think if you saw it swimming around would like look a lot like a whale. It's gonna come up to the surface and go and then go back down, right? But this is a big, big reptile. I think that's cool. Here's how big some of those Shonisauruses are, which is really great. There's one that's bigger than that, but that's like usually how big they're found as. Really interesting animals, very different ecologies amongst these early ichthyosaurs, very different ways of sculpting out your fins and things like that. Ichthyosaurs kind of keep going past the Triassic into the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, so alongside tons of dinosaurs. Ichthyosaurs do a bunch of things that I think are worth you guys noting. Once we get into the Jurassic is when they get that dolphin morphotype. And so here's some really beautiful ichthyosaur fossils here, really elongated snouts, very fish and squid eating, almost certainly. But some of them are actually probably very big predators. Temnodontosaurus is one that's huge. It's another one that's about a 30-footer that's probably eating other big vertebrates. It's got really stout and sharp teeth, which is really, really interesting. Temnodontosaurus and its relatives are famous in biology because they have what are quite clearly the largest eyes that we know of ever in the animal kingdom. Today, the giant squid has the biggest eye, but Temnodontosaurus, we know how big its eye is because it has all these sclerotic rings. And so this is the biggest eye as far as we know that's ever existed. What's really interesting about that, of course, is like, why would it need such a big eye? This thing is basically like a big toothed whale today, but it's a reptile. And so people wonder, because Temnodontosaurus fossils can be found in what were relatively deep ocean rocks, that's kind of like a loosey-goosey piece of evidence. But the eyeball and some of the other things make people wonder if it's one of these deep diving, like a sperm whale kind of thing, driving down into the black water to catch other stuff, which is really fun to imagine.
What's the function of the sclerotic ring?
It's like an eye brace. I mean, birds today, tons of animals today have it. It's not something that is particular to ichthyosaurs, but theirs are just super duper.
It's some kind of a support structure.
Yeah, I mean, there were ideas about, I don't know off the top of my head, so I don't want to make stuff up, but there's some ideas for some of the deep diving animals, including some birds that go deep, like gannets when they dive. Like the sclerotic railing helps the eye with like the pressure. There shouldn't be too much pressure on your eye when you go underwater because your eye's pretty much water, but some of that holding up your eye. But again, I don't want to wave my hands too much. I also just want to show you guys how amazing some of these animals are. A Urinosaurus is another like 20-footer, but it has this very swordfish-like morphology. And it's just fantastic to me that, again, this is reptile stuff we're talking about here, not fishes. Really, really, really cool animals, really interesting animals. If this was paleontology, we'd have a whole ichthyosaur lecture, but it's not. So let's keep going. Another group of marine reptiles that show up are lepidosaurimorphs. So this guy swims around, very cool. Almost certainly ichthyosaurs are outside the crown group, today's living reptiles. But plesiosaurs, these animals go here, almost certainly. Lepidosaurs, related to these animals today, but separate from them. And it's part of this bigger group called Sauropterygians. So did anybody else evolve shells? Yes, a bunch of times. So this is not a turtle at all, Penatus. Actually, I'm gonna put up some pictures, have you guys talk to each other about these animals. These are Triassic Sauropterygians. Go ahead and chat with each other about them.
Added to this. I know, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So Bradley's doing that same OBCR work.
It is, oh, so.
Google, looks like a vacuum area.
What the? I didn't even see
that.
What? It's got like a, it must be like a hammerhead in the mouth.
Keep it in check. Yeah, that's right.
That's why I'm.
Yeah, very incestuous with Brett. Just went right where I got mine.
That's pretty common.
But she's a great fit for that program. All right, anything fun to say about these early Sauropterygians? What are you guys talking about? What are you noticing?
One of them looks like they're from Alice in Wonderland or something.
Which one?
The app.
Atopodentatus?
Atopodentatus.
Atopodentatus is great, huh? It's got like I don't know if it's actually literally thousands, but many, many hundreds of extremely tiny little teeth. So it's almost certainly sifting through the water or maybe the mud to pull out little animals, like filtering. That's the fossil. We have its whole body too, but this is the fossil of its head. Right there, and then there's a reconstruction.
Is it like elephant seal size or is it smaller? Picture it looks like.
Some of these ones, so this is a skeleton of a sea lion, and that's a skeleton of a nothosaur. So this is like supposed to like show you like that kind of idea of these like laying on the beach marine reptiles in the Triassic. Some of those nothosaurs can be elephant seal size, but Atopodentatus is not big. Atopodentatus is like, you could hold it like this. Yeah, which is really fun. Some of these ones with the shells, some of them have shells, some of them don't have shells. They all have these like, those are gigantic teeth on the roof of the mouth, as well as gigantic bulbous teeth on the side of the jaw. These animals are all thought to be duraphages, like cracking open shells. to eat their food, which is really cool. So we got predators, filter feeders, shell crackers, all these early ecological niche space explorations. You can see a lot of these groups don't live for like ever. You know, maybe 15 million years of these animals called nothosauroids. There's a lot of them. They do a lot of different things. There's interesting body size, but they don't ultimately make it out of the Triassic. Yeah.
Do those placodontians have a carapace and
A planoplastron, they're
Yeah.
not at all the same as what turtles do. So turtles build their shell out of their like endochondral bones, out of their vertebrae and their ribs. These are like almost totally dermal structures
Okay.
with like kind of a boring skeleton underneath.
Do they?
So it's not at all like, I wouldn't call it a plastron. They have a lower shell.
Okay,
Yeah, but it's not the same structures, like from their gastralia.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, we're out of time. I should stop. Anyway, we'll talk about plesiosaurs on, this is where we'll start. One of the groups of Streptorygians that goes on is Hickenbutt is these plesiosaurs. All right, we'll talk about that on Friday.
I have one comment too, for, with respect to the lab exam. Some people told me they didn't do nearly as well as they wanted to. And so we will have an opportunity, I'll get those graded over the weekend. And you will have an opportunity to do a retake if you didn't do well. I don't want people to get discouraged with poor performance on the very first test. So you will have a chance to
Yeah.
at that again.
So did you grade some already, but you haven't graded them all yet?
I haven't graded any of them,
Oh, yeah.
but I had some people come up, well, I looked at some of them and I could tell.
Yeah.
Often people don't realize this for test, it's probably more rigorous.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny for me, it seems. So.
You're like, of course. It's a plepiodontic.
I won't be able to fill today or Friday. Friday, I'm driving back to Boise, and then I have to choose Johnson's graduation.